So welcome everybody, but a particular welcome to you, Barbara. Barbara Sarah Smith, and it's really delightful to have you on this call. It's very nice to see you again, having just spent a week with you, and recognising the background there from having been there in person. You're currently in the Azores, and you are an American, and you live between America and the Azores, and no doubt we'll hear more about that. And you've worked in the field of addiction recovery, amongst other things, but for many years now. And obviously it'd be better to hear from you more about exactly what your work is. But this is one of a series of calls that I'm doing, partly because I have a deep and personal interest in the subject, and partly to support a conference that you and I are both part of the team, the organizing team for, that's taking place in Minnesota and St. Paul next year in May. And perhaps you can remember the date, because I don't have it to hand, but I can certainly put that in the notes anyway.
Yeah.
And I think this is the first conference that there has been that is purely focused on the how the three principles can impact and recovery from addiction. So that may or may not be something that we touch on tonight. And the topic of tonight's call, which you came up with, was a bridge of wisdom. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that unfolds this evening. But perhaps with that kind of general introduction, Barbara, I could just hand it over to you, and it'd be lovely to hear a little bit more about your background, your professional life, your interest in addiction and recovery, and indeed the bridge of wisdom. Over to you, Barbara.
Good. Thank you, Kristen. Yeah, we did. We had a lovely time of talking and reflection together here in a very, very beautiful part of the world. So I feel like we're both recharged from that experience.
Yeah.
So I guess just to talk a little bit about myself, I have been a psychotherapist, and I have an MSW, and I have been a psychotherapist for over 40 years. And I have been in the field of addictions for over 30 years. And addictions has been a really a passionate interest area of mine. I've always found that people who are, I remember reading a book by Scott Peck one time that said people who are addicted are really lucky because they get taken to their knees, and they at that point, then when they get taken to their knees, they can ask for the help that we all need to get through life. So he really saw the gift of addiction very clearly, and I think I've always experienced it that way. So in my practice, I've always worked with people. I've worked in treatment centers, but I've also worked in I've had my own practice for the past 25 years or so, and my specialty was in everybody would get referred to me who didn't want to go to AA, who didn't want to participate in the program for whatever reasons, and there were a lot of different reasons. So it was I always felt I always felt there was so much good to be had out of AA, and I really wanted to try to help people get what they could from it. But, people had various mindsets about what was wrong with AA and that it didn't help them. And then I also worked with many, many people who were very, very involved with AA, and but we're not, they may have been sober in AA for 25 years sometimes, but we're still coming into psychotherapy because they had not found joy. They were still struggling with depression and anxiety. They were still struggling. They weren't happy. And, it seemed to me at that point that AA was really failing them. And so, again, this has been a conversation that I've been having with people for many, many, many years. Then 5 years ago, I was introduced to the principles. And for me, that really started to change so much in terms of beginning to answer questions about why AA worked when it worked and why it didn't work when it didn't work, and sort of what was going on there. And it was so clarifying for me. And one of the conversations that Christian and I have had over the last week together has been, at this point, the principles, we're all still learning a great deal in terms of how the principles can help with addiction. I know that for me, I'm still consider myself in a learning phase of that. And I think there's a lot that we can learn from the successes of AA. I just sort of wanted to talk about that and what for me, how I see it works when it works and why it doesn't when it doesn't. So I think one of the things, I think the primary thing really in our culture in the world today is that as a former atheist, or at least agnostic, and probably to extremes, I really think that so much of our culture today is starting to shift towards the spiritual, but we really got away from the spiritual nature of our existence. And in AA, that Bill W. had a very profound, extraordinary, profound spiritual awakening. And he spent the rest of his life trying to figure out what had brought about that spiritual awakening. He went and hung out with, he wrote to Carl Jung, and he talked to many, many people, certainly the Oxford group, but he even went and started to drop acid at Harvard with Timothy Leary and the boys, just again to try to see if he could explain this profound experience that he had in a hospital room in Ohio. I believe he was in Ohio at the time. And I actually bought interestingly, I bought his autobiography by Susan Cheever, and because I really wanted to read about this awakening. And in this book that's probably about 3 inches thick, that spiritual awakening is one sentence.
Wow. I did not know that.
Yeah.
And what is that? What is the gist of that, if you can remember? So I don't mean to put you on the spot.
He was laying in bed and he had this white light experience where he got that it was all love, that the world was love. And at that moment, his desire to drink was lifted. That was it in the book, right? Everything else was about him, what the groups that he started and the 12 steps. And, I thought, wow, that's kind of what I saw. So what I would see is that people would come in, a lot of my clients would come in and they would say, well, I don't want to go to AA because I don't want to deal with the God talk. So again, we have this culture where religion, I think, is kind of in some ways besmirched the name of spirituality and of our connection to something deeper. And so they don't want to deal with God talk, and they don't want to deal with the level of spirituality that they were experiencing from people in AA. So, a lot of them, I said, well, they would say, well, people will tell you, and there's some of you, if any of you have been in AA, you may have heard this, but people will say, well, if you don't worry about the God talk, don't worry about the religion, just if you desire power, you can borrow mine, or you can just have a doorknob, and it's like, okay, well, so we'll just give up that part. We'll just do these steps. And we have to keep going to meetings. We have to keep going back. We have to keep going back. We have to keep going back. And so many of the people that I saw, particularly who had been in recovery for a long time, one of the standard fare that was dished out was if you're not doing well. And one of the last clients I saw really who was deeply involved in AA came to see me with a profound depression. And her sponsor had just told her she was extremely depressed, that the problem was that, she needed to do another 4th step. And for those of you who aren't familiar with 12-step, it's where you basically dig out, all the wrongs that you've made in your life. And she was so extraordinarily depressed about that she was almost immobilized by it. And yet she couldn't let go of what she was being told as truth from the people in the program, from her sponsor. And she didn't, as I recall, didn't stay around very long in our conversations. My experience is that a number of people that I've seen have been very threatened by the message. And in talking with Joe Bailey, the message of the 3 principles, the truth in the 3 principles, in talking with Joe Bailey about that, one of the things he said to me that was so, just hit me like a ton of bricks was, they don't trust themselves. They've been taught by a system that you can't trust yourself, that you have this disease, you can't trust what you're thinking, you can't trust anything about it. I have had a number of people who were 12-steppers who left because one literally left my office screaming, like, I can't win this. Just really felt it was such a tremendous threat to her sobriety. So, again, I think the spiritual piece is lost there, because I think what people became focused on, in my experience, was the dogma of the 12 steps. And while I do think the 12 steps have a tremendous, I think Bill W. really sort of downloaded that wisdom, in bed one night. These came to him, and they are pulled together a lot of wonderful spiritual concepts. But we then, as we often do, make a God out of the dogma and forget the God that is beyond the dogma. And I think that's, again, from my experience, where so many of the people sort of, we lost the thread. I just wanted to, I think that's, from my experience, we really lost the spiritual nature of it all in some of the dogma. And yet it's so critical. Again, Christian and I were talking this week, and maybe you want to chime in a second here, Christian. We don't have, a 3 principles support group on every corner in every town, every day, 365 days a year. And that community, that help is so critical. So many of my clients who are getting sober and working with me still go to AA, and they really, what they're able to do now in sort of seeing what works and what doesn't, and why it doesn't, they're able to pull out the best of both of those worlds and use them in a way that is so helpful to them. They are able to go and listen and feel a part of a shared experience with some of the other people. They may gain a great deal from some of the older members, spiritual and the lightness of some of the people who've been in the program for a long time, the laughter and the camaraderie. And yet they can see, no, I really don't need to pull out every negative thing I've ever done in my life. Thank you very much, and they're able to, so again, we're able to bridge this, because there is so much wisdom. There is so much wisdom incorporated in AA. And it really is learning how to mine that out and figuring out, helping people to see, well, this we can use, and this, and I feel this way about really so much of the stuff that I read, so much of the spiritual writings. And now one of the things that the principles has really done for me is given me this tremendous clarity about how to mine the wisdom from things.
Mm-hmm.
And some of you have heard me say this before, but one of my favorite things, I used to own and operate a spiritual retreat center with my husband, who was an Episcopal priest. And Thomas Jefferson actually wrote a copy of the Bible called the Jeffersonian Bible. He didn't write it, but what he did was he went through the Bible and he cut out the parts that he felt were man-made and left in the parts that he felt were divinely inspired. And I think, if you ever get a chance to take a look at the Jeffersonian Bible, it's really quite amazing. Now, granted, it came through his lens, but I think we could do something similar for our clients who are learning the principles to be able to mine the wisdom and bridge the wisdom of these two sources of truth in our lives. Yeah. So that's a lot of talking. Christian, do you have anything else you want to say there?
No, yes, just briefly. It's lovely, and I think you're so accurate in the bit about the not trusting yourself. And it's funny because while you were having that realization on your side of the world, I found myself having that relationship after about 15 years in recovery. It was I had the realization or insight, and it just came to me, in of all places, a car park, that was, if you don't start trusting yourself, you're never going to have any quality of life. And it was just I just saw it, and I saw what I'd done, that everything I was doing and saying, I was kind of running through a filter of, is it sober? And I mean, none of that is said in any of the original AA literature, but there's this stuff that comes in that people say, but I could see what I was doing, and it meant that I was never just authentically trusting myself or trusting my authentic self. I was everything was edited and filtered and working. And in that moment, it was just, I'm dropping that. That's fine. That can go. And it was really life-changing. Not life-changing that I could immediately say this happened and then that happened, but just a very different come from. And it was before I discovered the principles, but it was part of that journey to what I now feel is a kind of wholeness. I'm comfortable in my skin. I don't think I'm perfect. I don't care that I'm not perfect. If I do something that I feel is really out of order, I'll apologize. I don't mean I let it all hang out. But it's a very different place to be. I love that. And it is today one of the things I talk about if I'm, talking in some kind of recovery situation. But I tend not to, I think some of what you call the dogma, it's not actually in the original AA literature. Even it's things that become, that becomes said, and it can be difficult to distinguish. But I love also what you're talking about, there being truth in the Bible, obviously, and other writings. And it seems to me a lot of the stuff that's in the standard text of Alcoholics Anonymous, the big book, is on all fours with the three principles, to throw in some other numbers. But the simplicity of the principles is so helpful. And there's less of that dogma, but it can creep in. People have an idea it should be taught this way. And if that makes sense for them, then fantastic. But if it may not make sense for me or other people listening to this call, and there is no right way. I have found myself at times almost editing myself and, thinking, what will this teacher who I like think of me, or something like that. And again, and it's just revisited, coming back to, it doesn't matter. It's not that the gift that we have is the capacity to, one of many gifts that we have is that there is a capacity to access wisdom, but it's unfiltered. You know, it's not through somebody else's. It's not improved by somebody else's good ideas about it, I think. Yeah. I'm also I had a sort of question coming up, which I'll maybe put out there and park. But I'm also noticing that a couple of people have put, they put comments on the chat, but I'm, you know, very happy to give anyone a chance to come in. But the question I was going to ask is, where might you begin if somebody, you know, let's say a friend of a friend, you know, Barbara deals with this, and you go and see her, and you have a new client who has a you know, an addiction from where, and I know that's a very general and hypothetical question, but where are some of the places you might start, and how might you introduce the 3 principles to them if you felt it were helpful to do that early doors?
Oh, that's a good question. I honestly don't think there's a one size fits all. I think that what I'm looking at is, you know, very individual in terms of, you know, again, a lot of people come to me because they know I've got something different. They always have, right? Before the principles, they knew that I wasn't going to just jump down their throat with, you got to go to a lot of meetings. So, you know, usually that's where we start. Like, tell me what doesn't work for you about this. Now, in the past, even though I have a you know, a lengthy background in spiritual stuff, I'm almost, you know, went to Harvard Divinity School, and, you know, I mean, my degree is really, you know, it was not okay in the field of psychotherapy to even raise that. I mean, when I was trained 40 years ago, like, that wasn't even on a history. You know, we didn't ask people about their spiritual connection. That has changed very dramatically now. So if someone is seeking something spiritually, you know, I think that's where I would certainly start with them. You know, tell me about what it is, how it is you see your life, and how it is you see yourself as part of a greater whole. But I think that a lot of people need to address, you know, a relationship issue, or they need to address their anxiety or depression, or, you know, again, their stuckness. I think that's the biggest thing for people who've been in the program for a long time. They feel just stuck. They get to a certain place and they just can't seem to get any traction to get beyond where they are. And I think that's part of the problem in 12-step recovery, is that when you're looking outside yourself for something to help you make you feel better, you know, you're going to keep looking for a long time, because, as we all know, the answers aren't there. So, you know, you do get into a pattern of sort of spinning your wheels. So often that's where people come in, and that's where we'll start. And again, now with the principles, I have an answer for that. Before, I didn't really. You know, I might have even said to them, you know, try harder, do this, or how about meditation? You know, I mean, I can tell you, as someone who didn't learn the principles until almost 40 years into her practice, and that may be a record among everybody I've heard here on these calls. You know, I gave a lot of really bad advice, not innocently. I mean, I didn't know. You know, people would come in and say, oh, I know someone can't make me feel something. And I'd say, oh, yes, they can. They absolutely can. You know, they have the key to your control panel. You know, I would launch into these things and they'd go, oh, yeah, they do. You know, you know, it's very humbling. It's very humbling to think about that. But it was totally innocent. You know, I just was trained classically, and we just believed the outside-in paradigm was true. You know, that your feelings really did come from what had happened to you in your life, and we needed to analyze that, and you needed to heal it somehow. You needed to go back and dig it all out and take the scabs off and let it reheal in a different way. And now I look at it, it doesn't even make any sense. But again, that was what I was spoon fed, and I bought it hook, line, and sinker. Until I became terribly, terribly burned out a few years ago, because I thought, what the heck are we doing here? We're just going over the same stuff. And quite frankly, I just got so bored in sessions that I thought, if I can't show up in a loving way in a session, I can't be effective at doing this work. So what am I going to do? I'm going to have to change careers. And at 60, that didn't seem like a very reasonable alternative. So that's sort of where I got into the principles. So I don't know if that answers your question, Christian, but I'm going to start wherever people are, and I think that's true with sharing the principles too. Is, and certainly early on in sharing this, I was just like, oh, look here, outside in, inside out, here you go. And they're like, what? But Kathy Casey said something to us once when we were trying to develop this program for a prison, which is really, really helpful. And of course, it's everything we ever learned at social work school, which is to start where the person's at. And, if they want to talk about their relationship problems or the problems with their wife or, their sexual inadequacy or whatever it is they want to talk about, then that's the way in.
Yeah.
And so, and then, as Kathy said, George Pransky is a master at that. He can take belly button lint and take it back to the principles. I thought, yeah, that's good. I'd like to be able to be that good at it. I'm getting better, but I'm not that good yet. So does that help? Does that answer the question you had?
Yeah. It was. It's interesting just to hear you illustrate a little more about how you work work with people, and again, I'm often struck in our conversations of when we were talking about this recently, of the experience in the Mandela Project, where the principles were introduced initially slowly, but over a 2-year period to an entire community. But one of the things that really stuck with me about that was that most of the households were single parent households with a mother who often had a substance abuse issue, and at the end of it they were virtually all sober, but they had got there through different means, whether it was AA or NA or a treatment centre or a church or just stops, or any, whatever made sense. And I love that, that actually we all have different routes, and it really underlined that the wisdom that is available to each of us, and that really is a thing. And once my eyes were open to that, I've seen it. I see it everywhere in every area of life. But I'm even thinking right back to my early days of recovery. I had a very, very clear sort of sense that I was okay around drink. I mean, drink was my main thing. I was okay around drink. I was okay going into a pub. I was in my 20s. I wasn't like, I could go off to a nunnery at that stage. But I also knew where the certain things were my limits. I couldn't work around. I mean, there were people in recovery I knew who did. They had pubs. They worked in them. I could never have done that. I just sort of knew. And I think that, as you say, just starting with in a conversation with someone about anything at all, you begin to be able to draw that out of them of what and obviously if you're talking about substance abuse, then you can move it around to what's relevant there, but you can draw. One of the things I love about this work is you can draw the evidence that supports the fact that the principles are operating in all of us all the time from the person's own life. You just know it will show up. That they will have examples of thinking differently about the same thing than someone else in their family or their work, or even thinking differently about it themselves at different points in time, and so on. You can begin to demonstrate the creative role that thought plays in making their experience real.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted you, what are you happy to open it up? I mean, as I say, there were a couple. They were just comments, not questions. But I don't know if other people. There are other people in the call I know that have experience in this area, and so it'd be lovely to, from my point of view, to hear from others. Are you happy with that, Barbara?
Yeah, that's fine. There was one other thing I just wanted to say, and this is sort of, I think, I started out talking about the spiritual, and then I really definitely want to hear from everybody. In the big, in the in the big book, one of the things that it says, one of my clients who'd been in AA for like 25 years when he first was learning the principles with me, and he said, look in the big book, it says, as a result of these steps, we had a spiritual awakening. And again, there's, if you believe that,
Mm-hmm.
That it's not just built into the design and it's available to all of us anytime, that really takes you down the wrong path in terms of the access that we have to this deeper wisdom at all times, to insight, to waking up, to seeing, to seeing a deeper truth about ourselves and the world around us. So, I just wanted to throw that in there, that I think that's I would say one of the primary places where a lot of people get stuck spiritually. Like, if I don't do it according to this prescription, I'm screwed, Yeah. And as we all know, in the principles world, that's just not the case. So please, now I'd love to hear from people.
Wendy, you're unmuted. Come in.
Hi there. This is a great conversation. I just happened to be cruising on Facebook and saw this Zoom call posted, and I couldn't be happier. I am I don't know how you describe it, but I've been in Alcoholics Anonymous on a very regular, weekly, 4 years, probably 12 or 13 years. Came to a realization that alcohol was no longer serving a healthy purpose in my life. So I identified as an alcoholic for many years, and now I'm a little bit confused when I'm sitting in a meeting when they go around the room. Hi, my name is Wendy. I'm a person. I don't even know what to say anymore, but because of the principles. But just yesterday, actually, what is it, Barbara? Our guest.
Yes.
What Barbara, what you shared particularly about the lens that the 3 Ps can now overlay on any wisdom teaching was beautifully put, and a nice synopsis from my experience too. Just yesterday, the woman speaking at our meeting, qualified, as we say in the halls, or hopefully I'm not using language that's too weird to anybody, but she said, she gave this awful, story. This sister was diagnosed with cancer in June. Sister 2 was diagnosed with cancer in September. Sister 3 was diagnosed with cancer the following January. Her husband was diagnosed with cancer the following March, and a brain cancer. I mean, it was just this litany, and she was very close with her family and all these people, and it was just a really bad situation, bad story. And she woke up one day and looked in the mirror at her droopy red eyes, and she said, why am I drinking myself to death? My family needs me. I need me. I can't do this anymore. And she put the drink down. Well, she went to an AA meeting that day, and she never drank again for the past 4 or 5 years. And she described, how her mind cleared and she was available. And the very interesting thing she said was, to me, her sister still had cancer. Her husband still had cancer. She was not one of those stories in AA that's so prevalent, which is I put the drink down and I got a job. I was able to get my car. I was able to reestablish relationships with my family because I got myself out of the gutter. It wasn't that. She was a professional woman with a professional life, with a lot of sadness because of family members who were quite ill, and she stopped drinking, and she had family members who were quite ill. But her perspective changed. And so it was a chance to, we all can raise a hand and say, thank you for sharing what you shared today. And I want to comment. And that's always now my comment in AA meetings, is seeing how thought can change our perspective in a nanosecond. You don't have to do all the 12 steps. You don't have to get an insight or a change of heart, a change of mind. So I really appreciate, like I say, within 24 hours, these two notions of the three principles now provide an overlay to anything that I see. And it was just, it's just really, really powerful. And to your point about when people talk about the 12 steps, one of the 12 steps is as the result of doing the steps, we got a spiritual awakening, not a result. And oftentimes when the steps are read, people will say as a result. It isn't as a result as though there were many results. It's as the result, meaning there's one result, a spiritual awakening as the result of doing these steps. So that's enough out of me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wendy.
Thanks, Wendy. Really nice to meet you. Thanks for joining the call.
Yeah.
Barbara, any comment on anything that you occurred to you while Wendy was sharing?
Well, again, it's totally innocent. I mean, I think that it looks true. It looks true. If you go to a meeting and you get sober while you're in the meeting, it's a natural conclusion in our minds that the meeting just got me sober. I remember at the treatment center that I worked at for 15 years in Washington, D.C., the psychiatrist that we worked with, we had a big conversation about whether or not we were going to allow people who were pretty significantly under the influence to stay in the group. And he was very clear that the answer was absolutely yes. He said, because when a cat wakes up under a chair, it thinks the chair is its mother. So if you go into a meeting and you happen to have a moment of clarity where you're able to get sober in that moment, you're going to assume that came from that's cause and effect, right? And that was sort of the model that was built from that. Only, as one of the other founders of this treatment center that I worked at for years said, he was a big time AA person, but he said people get sober everywhere. I mean, I've known people who've gotten sober in the gutter or, and on vacation in France or, I mean, you can have an enlightenment experience anywhere, anyhow, anytime, and to just know that and to point people towards that, to me, it doesn't mean that there isn't good stuff in AA, because there's tremendously good stuff in AA. But, you're now disconnecting that sense of not trusting in how life actually works. Catherine and I have been having this conversation about a retreat we're doing next winter, that you can begin to trust, like, oh, yeah. I used to work with this at that treatment center. I told Kristen, I want everybody to know this. I worked with an old recovering heroin addict named Teddy. Teddy had been on the streets of DC for 25 years. And, he used to always say, Miss Barbara, I got your back. I got your back, And I think about Teddy a lot now, because Teddy really had it wrong in his level of training. I mean, he really, he would really, that's a whole nother conversation. But, the principles have got our back. It's working. Everything's working the way just fine, and you're going to be able to see, because you're designed to be able to see. to be able to wake up. The capacity for insight, the capacity for transformation is built in. And it's got our back. You know, we don't have to feel that there's all this stuff we have to do, you know, because once we slow our minds down enough to listen to our inner GPS, you know, we turn down the volume on all the other stuff that's distracting us, you just start to see things that have always been there. You've just never been able to bring them into focus before.
Yeah, yeah. And that capacity for insight is another thing that I think is often drawn out in a conversation with somebody new or a client, that you know, that you once you start to introduce the idea that of aha moments, and initially sometimes the response is, oh no, I've never had anything like that, and then you dig a little deeper and everybody has. So once again, you're drawing the evidence from their own life and their own history out as to illustrate the how life operates for all of us. And that's and it's funny because it's always a very enjoyable thing. Having an insight is always, you know, always brings with it, at least in my experience, you know, a sense of empowerment or a sense of something, you know, a sense of being energized, or just a thought change, ego collapsing. You know, it's yeah, very nice experience. But as you say, I mean, mostly I know more people who have had that moment of clarity in the gutter, literal or figurative, than you know, on a retreat or on a mountain. And it's not that the gutter has any magic either, but it's sometimes at that very point that you know, that our self-will sort of falls away or something like that. Yeah. Anybody else with a question or a comment?
I'd like to speak.
Hi, Jason.
Hi, Jason.
Hi, Barbara. Yeah, I love the conversation. It just really made me reflect a lot on my own experience. 25 years of 12-step recovery. And I was thinking, you know, that comment when you said about someone saying, look, it says having had, you know, it's kind of that means you have to do the work, then you get the experience, you know, you don't get the spiritual awakening before doing the work, you know. That was like you know, that was something I used to say, you know, like a good recovery robot, you know. The same thing that everyone else said, you know, and it was kind of, I really believe that was true, because and I guess from the perspective that I had at the time, that was true. You know, it was kind of like that was all I saw. You know, that was the limitation of my awakening at that time. And I would say that throughout the years, you know, I had various levels of, you know, if there are such a thing as levels, but various awakenings. You know, it's kind of like that. I came from a life of committing crime and going to jail and living on the streets, you know, to being a productive member of society. You know, I went through various changes of state of mind, you know, how I saw life, how I saw myself, and how I saw people. And kept repetitively going through the steps, thinking there was something wrong. I mean, my life got infinitely better on the outside, but not particularly in my inner world, you know. And I always thought, you know, for those 25 years of going to the meetings, I thought, oh, I must have had the wrong sponsor, I must have missed something in the steps, I must have got it wrong, you know, because I really wasn't at peace. And you know, to the point where it was like, probably in the last 10 years, you know, it was kind of like, I just looked around and I said, you know, there's no one that I want to be my sponsor. There isn't anyone. I didn't have anyone, you know, and it's like, I didn't have a sponsor because I was just like, thought, I don't want what these people have got. And I went elsewhere, and I spent 5 years training, you know, did a master's degree in transactional analysis in psychodynamic theory, and trained as a psychotherapist. And because I thought, well, the answer's not in the steps, it must be somewhere else. Even though I kept going to meetings, I'd say my life got worse rather than better. You know, at that time I dug into trauma, and my childhood, and all, because that's the direction that stuff points you in. Everything's a result of the loss of your father as a child, and the way you were brought up, and the fact that your mum was a workaholic, and and then I struggled with crippling anxiety, and I had a long period of depression while I was training. It was kind of like I was just constantly in that in that searching. And I think where I'm at now is that, I haven't been to meetings, in a while, and it's like, actually, tell a lie, I went to one the other week because there was a convention on, and people were like, oh, there's lots of people coming from America with lots of clean time, and like, I was always the person at the meeting with by far the longest clean time, like 10 or 15 years more than the next person, and it was like these people were coming who had 40 years and 30 years and all that. And I said, okay, one of my friends rang and said, will you come? And I was like, okay, I'll go, but I sat there and I felt such a fish out of water. I felt so out of place. I thought, I am not saying that I'm an addict. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to introduce myself and speak and say I'm an addict and identify and say how great my life is as a result of this stuff, because I just, when I found the principles, I woke up to something different. I woke up to that innate capacity that was within me. I woke up to the fact that I didn't need to go to meetings anymore. I thought, wow, what a revelation. I'm not going to die. It's kind of like that story that everyone's told me for years, that if you stop going to meetings, that's what's going to happen to you. And that was scary. That must have been about 23 years of attending regularly, and wherever I went to meetings. And that was a bit scary at first, and it happened a little bit gradual, but like now it's kind of like, I can't think of anything worse than going to a meeting, and that's my stuff. I know also that, like, I struggle with going there because I feel that like there's so many people that could find this stuff useful. There's so many people sat there with a false smile on, saying how wonderful their life is, and how good it is, not knowing what they don't know, not knowing what else is available, but also thinking that that's the best that they've got, and also knowing that I can't speak that in that environment, in some ways, because it's like, it just seems to me, it just at the moment just looks like it doesn't fit. And I'd love to go back, and because there are people that I love there, people that I care about, but like, I don't want to I don't feel like going back. I'm just, I love my life as it is, and I love the freedom that I have, and I love the insight that I have about what's true about life and what's not. But yeah, I'd love to find some way of being able to go and because I know that I know what I found is so useful to people. But also, I work in the industry as well, and it's like there's so much resistance from 12-step people. There's so much insecurity and so much which comes out in anger, and it comes out in sabotage, and it comes out in different ways. Like to me trying to introduce this new paradigm to to people who have got that understanding. So like, yeah. I'm in a transitioning period, but but I'm good. I'm in a good place. But I'm loving the conversation because it's very apt for things that I think about and the place that I'm at. And yeah, I'm in the middle of writing a long article, probably be about 5,000 words. I interviewed Bill Pettit, and we in 2 hours we talked about the disease concept of addiction, how it developed through the fellowships and through treatment, and we talked about a lot of the things in the steps. Is it useful to look at the past? Are we really powerless? Things like that. And we had a great conversation about it, and I'm kind of writing it up into an article, and hopefully I'm going to publish it pretty soon in the next couple of weeks. So yeah,
I'll be anxious to see that, Jason. That sounds great.
Yeah, I'm loving where I'm just letting my fingers flow and the keys flow as I'm writing it, and I'm hoping that many of the 12-step therapists at work don't try and veto it because of their insecurity, but I've tried to be as neutral as possible, and my conclusion is it doesn't matter whether it's a disease. It's not really, it's kind of like, I don't really want to be too either way or the other, whatever's useful. I'm grateful for my experience, for what happened for me, my own experience of finding fellowships, and I guess I've just awakened, like see something further than that. I mean, Bill described it as better and best, like types of, like solutions, and that's kind of how I see it. I mean, that was a better solution to my life than what I had myself, but this is the best solution that I've got now,
Yeah, I think that's been my experience too, Jason, with people who may have been in the program for a long time. And again, those who are able to remain open and not hear it as a tremendous threat are really do find that, I have one person in particular who has been in the program for over 30 years. She's been sober, stable sobriety all that time, and came to me with a really pretty significant anxiety and depression problem. And now she's just like, I didn't even know it was possible to be this happy, and yet she feels very, very loyal to AA and continues to go back and try to, insert little pieces of this. And I kind of gave that up after I don't insert unless asked, because it seems like such a threat to people, and it doesn't to everyone, but it certainly has been more of my experience that people have been really trained to not trust themselves. And I was a big part of that. I don't know if you were, but one of the things that I think about a lot, it really breaks my heart, is that when people would first enter treatment, we had an intensive outpatient program, and they would come in and they would have started to have some insights. They would see the light, they would start to have this opening. And I don't know what you did, but we would extinguish that. We would say, oh, no, that's the pink cloud. No, you can't trust that. Don't trust that pink cloud. No. And we would, so it was like this tiny little shoot that was, growing, and we would step on it. We'd trample it. No. Can't trust yourself, can't trust the pink cloud, bad, and it just breaks my heart. But again, it was all we knew at that point. And so I had one woman who I did an intensive with, who relapsed quite badly after that and had a suicide attempt and ended up inpatient, and then started in an outpatient treatment program while she was seeing me. So she was doing AA, an outpatient treatment program, and doing the principles, which she'd been doing with me for over a year. And the clarity for her that came out of that, she said, I know I need AA for the fellowship. I know I need that. I know when I can set limits with them about, I know I need a sponsor. I know, I got it. I need a sponsor. You want me to have a sponsor. You want me to do the steps. Got that part. But I'm coming for the meetings. And then, but in the treatment center, she said, they're telling me, A, I'm going to relapse. B, I can never trust myself. C, I am so broken. I am, I'm so diseased. Everything, I can't be alone in my head. All the stuff. She said, if I didn't have this, I would be dead now. She said, because I was the only person in that treatment center who didn't relapse. I was the only one. What a gift it is to know that I have everything I need. And as I say to people all the time, when you tell someone that they don't have cancer, oh, sorry, we got the files mixed up, you don't have cancer, it takes a lot off your mind. Well, when you can tell someone, no, you don't have a disease, we just have a new understanding now, sort of what's been going on and the misunderstanding you've had of where your experience of suffering is coming from. People are like, oh, well, that feels better. I never really thought I had a disease to begin with. So it's a totally different message. And yeah, for people who are locked in, as I was, I have to tell you, I don't know until I burned out whether I would have heard this message. I wish that I could say that I would have, but I don't know that I would have heard it. because I was working with some of the top people in the field. I was convinced we had, we were doing the best work out there. And so, when I think about your coworkers and people in your program, I kind of get it. I'm sure I would have been in the same boat at that point. It's kind of the opening. We have to be broken open in order to be able to hear something, a truth beyond what we currently think is true.
Yeah. One thing that occurred to me listening to both of you there is I think when I first came across the principles, I just had that sort of zeal of the new converts, and I wasn't necessarily very kind of diplomatic, and I thought everybody else would be as keen as I was to learn more. And I've now found, and I do go to recovery meetings from time to time, and I don't always say anything at all. I go because I find it a place that I like to hang out, and I can just let that, I don't need to get worried about how anybody else sees anything. And if I do share something, or sometimes I'm asked to speak, I have found ways of doing it in a way that I think sort of gives people hope, but isn't too confrontational and doesn't feel that there's anything inauthentic about it. So I talk about discovering my own unbrokenness, which was in distinction to the denial I had around my drinking, which I really did, and the chaos that was my drinking. But there was also underneath that this essential unbrokenness, and I find people really respond to that truth packs a punch, and it's just a little bit, and I love it when people you see people sort of light up a little bit or hear something new, and I don't need to do any more than that. If they want to hear more, they can find me. And I think that actually people are sometimes can be more receptive than you might imagine, but it is that, but not everybody. So I think some people seem to be very invested in it can become an identity, the past, the battles and all of that stuff. And I hate to admit it, but it was for me. Just but it's much nicer not to have that identity anymore.
I think that's the bridge, though, that we're talking about. It's being able to find the words, and I think it is an art. It's an art to be able to look at where people are and what it is we could offer that may at that moment be of interest to them. And as in AA, it really is a program of attraction. You're not going to sell this. You're not going to sell it if somebody doesn't want to hear it. I mean, one of the things Christian taught me this last week is, well, why would you start with a single paradigm when you're going to meet resistance to that? Yeah, good question. Why not talk, really move into something that they can maybe open to. So, to try to give this away to people who aren't ready to hear it, or who aren't suffering, or who don't see, everyone, all of my friends, all of my peers and my coworkers who who have eventually gone on to start to learn about this, really just saw the changes in me. And they're like, wow, you look great. I'd been very, very sick for a number of years with Lyme disease, and I was a mess. I was really in bad shape, and they're like, wow, you look fantastic. Like, what is going, I want what you have. And that's really, again, the program of attraction in AA too.
Yeah.
Like, why are you laughing? What's so, you look good. Why? So it's not something we can shove down people's throats, for sure.
Yeah. Well, Barbara, you beautifully brought that back to the bridge of wisdom, and starting with where people are. And just as we come to the end of our hour, I don't know if you have any last words that you'd like to share, before we close out, but
I don't think
it was so elegant. Well, thank you so much for making the time. It's really been a pleasure. It's been lovely. It's been lovely to hear the comments from other people. And if you didn't get a chance to come in this time, then I'm sorry. There will be another call, possibly not in 2 weeks because we have a family thing, but certainly in 4. They're happening every fortnight until at least the end of year, and possibly until the conference happens in May next year.
Yeah, thank you. And I hope to see everybody at the conference, or at least some of you at the conference, where it would be really exciting to meet some of you in person, live and in person in St. Paul in May. So
yeah. Well, thank you again, Barbara, and thank you everybody that it has been here. And Barbara, are you happy for your contact details to go on the note under the?
Absolutely.
Well, yeah. I'll put that. You may wish to give your website now, but I will put it in writing afterwards.
That's great. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Kristen.
Oh,
Thank
lovely.
you.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
Bye-bye.